There are so many job postings that are just, dental assistant, wage, call us. And it needs to be so much more than that. And it also needs to be about the employee experience, not just you and your practice and the clinical skills, but really, what are they going to experience?
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Raving Patients Podcast. As you know, I'm your host, Dr. Len Tao. And as I begin all of these episodes, I want to send you off with a couple of reminders. Number one is I want to thank the sponsors who allow me to come to your inbox with a new episode every single week. The sponsors are Dental Intelligence, CallRail, and Net32. So please check out their sponsors and obviously thank them for their support of the Raving Patients Podcast. I also want to remind everybody about my event, Supercharge Your Dental Practice. It's scheduled for September 25th through 27th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, in September of 2026. The resort is Pier 66, so a lot of sixes there. You do not want to miss it, as this is coming up towards the end of the year when we're recording this, and when it's releasing. You can go to superchargeyourdentalpractice.com and you can save on the early bird special good till the end of 2025. Today's episode is called, Is HR Sexy? Depends. Do you want to succeed? My guest is Alan Twigg from Bent Erickson Associates. Alan Twigg, president of Bent Erickson Associates, makes HR approachable and straightforward. With 18 plus years in the people side of the business, he's your go-to guide for navigating HR compliance, building standout onboarding experiences, navigating tough situations, fostering team belonging, and more. Alan helps leaders turn the ever-changing HR landscape into a competitive advantage because your people are your practice's greatest assets. So please welcome to the Raving Patients Podcast, Alan Twigg. Alan, thank you so much for finding the time to join me today.
Yeah, you bet, Len. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to jump in. I actually am one of those people that likes the HR side of things. I know it's a complicated, could be a complicated situation for practices. Obviously, one of the things you said in your bio is that the rules are ever changing. It's similar to like accounting law and CPA stuff, tax stuff. The stuff changes every year. I'm sure you have a ton of CE you have to take to keep up with all the changes in the HR world. So, what I like to do at the beginning of these episodes is kind of, for those that don't know who you are or don't know what Bent Erickson does, can you kind of just give a little couple minute spiel about how you help dental practices, what your role in the practices are, and kind of what you do to help the practices succeed?
Sure. Yeah, obviously, many dentists and many practice leaders struggle with the HR side of the practice. There's so many different aspects to it, from hiring, firing, the rules and laws, just the dealing with everyday, circumstances of employees and all of that. So a lot of folks struggle with it. And our mission is to basically transform leaders into HR pros. And we do that through a combination of technology and human training and support. And it's really just about recognizing that your team is your greatest asset. Your team is the thing that really separates you from the practice down the street. Anybody can buy the latest technology. Anybody can remodel their practice, but you can't just go out and find, amazing employees, especially right now in today's labor market. So you really have to work at that and build it. And ultimately, it's about good HR systems because, of course, all of your practice systems are dependent on people to run them. And without those people, you can't do all the amazing big goals and wonderful things that you want to do. So without the HR systems, you will struggle. And so for us, it's about giving you HR systems that are proven, that work, that are compliant, unique for your state, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what we do.
We have some, single doctor mom and pop shops that are listeners as well. You don't have to be a big organization to have an HR company that they work with. I think there's sometimes a misconception that, hey, I don't need an HR person helping me because I'm a solo doctor with a couple of team members. That's not true, correct?
Correct. No, once you have just one employee, about 95% of all of the rules and laws apply to you. So, yeah, it's a common misconception. I only have 5 employees, so, I don't need to worry about this, or I don't need an employee handbook because I only have 4 employees. And the reality is, all of the Fair Labor Standards Act stuff, a lot of federal rules, all the state rules, a lot of them kick in just when you have one or more employees. Now, there are various rules that do change when you have, say, 10 or 15. So it is important to know your individual state rules and also know some of the federal rules that do vary based on how many employees you have. But yeah, in this day and age, once you have just one employee, you're in the game, so to speak.
And that makes a lot of sense. But I wanted to make sure other people knew that as well. So let's, obviously the hiring landscape or the employee landscape has changed significantly since COVID. It's difficult to hire really good employees. It's difficult to find really good employees. So the market is really challenging still, and it probably will continue that way. So I'm curious, what can offices do to kind of put themselves ahead of everybody else when it comes to hiring, kind of make you the choice where people want to come to work?
Yeah, absolutely. And without a doubt, it is the most difficult labor market we've ever seen in dental right now. And the reality is just there's a lack of supply. With COVID, we saw a lot of people retire. We saw a number of people exit the industry because of various reasons. So there's just a lack of supply right now. And unfortunately, the forecasts from the ADA and Bureau of Labor Statistics are not good. It's potentially going to get actually worse. And I am a little bit encouraged when I, see these headlines about huge companies laying people off. I'm not obviously happy for those people, but my first thought is always, well, maybe this can be an opportunity for folks in the dental space to hire people who have the right attitude and the right, behavioral traits. And then potentially we can train them in some of the areas, or maybe these folks will find the dental world because of how meaningful it is to work in dental. The fact that it's not, a 80-hour-a-week kind of a job, and that it really does make a difference for patients' lives and is really special in that regard. So how do you kind of separate yourself from the practice down the street? That is the big question. And every practice leader, in my opinion, really needs to spend a little bit of time with a cup of coffee and think about what it is that makes their practice unique from an employment standpoint. Every practice has already done that analysis of, well, why should a patient choose me? And it's, the technology in my office and my clinical skills and all of that. But why should an employee choose your practice versus the practice down the street? And of course, that's not just about wages and benefits. Yes, you need to offer competitive wages and benefits, but you don't need to offer the absolute highest wages to get good people in your practice. What that's really about, though, is about the employee experience, what it feels like to be an employee in your practice. And again, that idea of what separates you from the office down the street. And you really want to think about, if I was in an interview with someone and they had an amazing attitude, amazing resume, tons of great relevant dental experience, exactly what I want, I should be able to look at this person and say, you should come and work for me, and here's why. And it's unique for everyone. Some offices are more fun and casual. Some offices are really professional. Some offices, it's about technology and the latest advancements and cutting edge clinical dentistry. For other offices, it may just be that we like to have fun on the job, and we have a whole group of employees here where everyone is welcoming and accommodating and fun, and we offer a lot of onboarding, or we offer a lot of CE. Whatever it is, it's about putting that into words, not only so that you can express that in the interview, but also, more importantly, that you can put that in the job postings, because that, of course, is the very first impression. And there are so many job postings that are just, dental assistant, wage, call us. And it needs to be so much more than that. And it also needs to be about the employee experience, not just you and your practice and the clinical skills, but really, what are they going to experience? So that's what we call the unique employment proposition, the UEP. And everyone should spend some time thinking about that.
Yeah, that's like your elevator speech to the employees. That's what I look at it as, is why they should come to you. And I was talking to a practice who reached out to me, and I run the dental division for Bird Eye, so I deal with reviews all the time. And the dentist mentioned to me, which I haven't heard that often, but it was interesting the way that they pitched it, is that they're in a very competitive marketplace, and they wanted to get more positive reviews because they were looking to hire some people. And in the past, they had not so great reviews, and they feel that it actually turned potential employees away because they didn't like what they read online for the practice, so they didn't even want to come for an interview sometimes. So when you think about it that way, it really is a big thing that you have to put your best foot forward and give you the best first impression about the practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sometimes when we're working with an office, they'll say, well, I want to have a policy that says that you can't talk about the practice on social media, or you can't talk about anything negative about the practice. And I always think, well, let's flip that around and say, would you be okay with them talking really positive things about the practice? And it's like, let's focus on that. I think, in this profession, it's real easy to fall into the worst case scenario and the negative and all the bad experiences. But the reality is most of the employees in your practice are good employees. They want to do a good job. They want to provide for their families. They genuinely do want to help the patients. But of course, all of us need a good environment in order to thrive and do our best work. And so as the leader, it's about recognizing that and putting that little bit of time and energy into building that really great culture, which will, build that reputation of the practice. And then it's just a win-win all the way around.
I agree with you 100%. HR is kind of one of those topics that are kind of boring. They don't think it's that important. They don't necessarily want to ignore it, but they don't want to pay the absolute most attention to it. But I believe that you think totally different of that. So why should practices really pay attention to the changes that occur in the labor laws and everything else related to the HR part of the business?
Yeah, I mean, as I said earlier, every practice system depends on your HR systems. And the reality is, there's kind of the right way to do things and the wrong way to do things. And so in terms of labor law changes, so this is one where there's been a huge explosion in the last several years. So in the period from 2014 through 2019, we sent out 87 policy changes nationwide. So that wasn't very many. Not 87 nationwide, it's a relatively small number. But then in the period from 2020 through the end of 2024, we sent out 259. And again, these are big, significant things. It wasn't just COVID things that went away. This was things like mandatory sick leave, paid family leave, pregnancy disability accommodations. That's a big one right now. And you think about how common pregnancy is in the dental field. So those changes are significant, and those are both new laws and major changes to existing laws. And that's state and federal, all in that number. And this year, 2025, we're already on track to keep pace with that. So it's really important that every practice has some kind of mechanism for staying up to date with those changing laws. And one of the reasons why HR compliance is so important, I mean, I know dentists hear about compliance all the time as far as record keeping and OSHA and HIPAA and cyber and all of that stuff. One of the reasons why HR is so different from those is that it directly impacts your employees. And when it comes to fairness and consistency and employees receiving the benefits that they are entitled to, that is a completely different level of seriousness on their part, emotion, and in a sense, what they will fight for. And especially in today's day and age with ChatGPT and the accessibility of this type of information, it is so important that folks are in compliance with those HR rules. Now, to be clear, please do not use ChatGPT for your HR compliance. It gets things wrong all the time, but it will point if your employees are saying, well, I wonder if I'm supposed to get paid for this holiday, or I wonder if, when I'm pregnant, I should get, accommodations or something. They can punch that into ChatGPT and it will eventually point them to the actual information. Most state labor board information is readily available and searchable online. So it's just a matter of, in this day and age, it is really critical that you have some mechanism for staying in compliance with this stuff. Because every practice has those big goals, whatever it is, fee for service, multiple locations, whatever those big goals are. And you have to have a really good, solid, reliable team to get there. And if you're constantly having turnover, then you basically can't achieve those goals. And all of these things around HR and team building, culture, consistency, compliance, hiring the right people, the right attitude, et cetera, all of those things are necessary to achieve those big goals that every dentist wants to achieve.
Makes a lot of sense. You mentioned from 2020 to the end of 2024, there were 250 something changes. I think you said that were made. Or so, looking at 2025 and beyond, where are some of the biggest changes that are affecting that dental practice owners should be aware of?
Sure. Yeah, I mentioned pregnancy. That's one of the big ones. So the pregnancy disability accommodations, that's basically where when you have someone who's pregnant, you have to go through what's called the good faith interactive process. And that's where you and the employee are working together based on what they're going through as far as the phase while they're still working, and then the leave of absence phase, and then the phase after that where they're back to work and potentially nursing or doing breastfeeding or pumping and so on. And those, at this point, there have been 26 states that have passed that, as well as the federal government. So that's a big one. We're also seeing a big trend with state sick leave rules. And the sick leave is really important to know as far as how it impacts your PTO policies if you have PTO, because now all of those complicated sick leave rules now apply to your PTO, and it makes it that much more complicated. And another big one is paid family leave. So this is a program that works kind of like unemployment, where everyone pays into this big state fund. And then when someone has a medical issue, a pregnancy or something like that, they can take time off and pull from that general fund. It doesn't come out of the practice's bank account. But that is also becoming much more common, and those really change the landscape around medical leave, general leave of absence, pregnancy, adoption, all of that. So again, it's really important to know what your state rules are, and every state rule is a little bit different. So especially if you are coming from one state where maybe you grew up, now you're living in a different state, know that the rules may be completely different, the thresholds may be different, and even things like sick leave, paid family leave, pregnancy, there are little differences from state to state. So it's also not just a thing that across the board, it's the same. And sometimes folks will get, an employee manual from their friend who lives in a different state. And that's one of those risks with that, is that it may be for a totally different state and it doesn't actually apply to your state.
Well, thank you for explaining that. That seems like a lot of information to kind of harness. I remember one of the biggest things I see in the industry, and I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, as I'm sure you are. I'm in a lot of the dental ones, being a dentist, is that an employee resigns, quits, whatever. That is not fired, but they resign or quit, and then they apply for unemployment. And the dentist seems to take personal, they want to go out of their way to make sure that this person doesn't get any unemployment. Can you touch base on that? Because if I'm correct, there's unemployment compensation that you're paying for anyway. And that's where the money's coming in. They're not personally paying that either. So I'm sure you get that question a lot. That's a common, I think, misconception in the industry. Can you just touch base on that?
Yeah, definitely. And this is one of my favorite topics because it touches on so many different aspects here. So number one, in our opinion, unemployment is not a big deal. So if we want to separate kind of HR things that are a big deal and not a big deal, unemployment definitely goes in the not a big deal category. What is a big deal would be a lawsuit, a state labor board investigation, even just a threatening letter from a lawyer when there's no documentation. Those are the things that are a big deal. But unemployment, like you said, everybody pays into this general fund. And the rates are set by the state as far as different professions and turnover rates on average and all that. And they calculate the rates, and then everybody pays into it. And then, yeah, when the employee gets unemployment, it comes out of that general fund. A very common misconception is that there's only sort of two determining factors, and that's either was the employee fired or did the employee resign? And a lot of times folks think, well, if they were fired, they will always get unemployment, and if they resign, they will never get unemployment. And that's not the case. There are so many other circumstances that the unemployment departments take into account as far as the reason for each one, documentation, and so on and so forth. So unemployment is not a big deal. And in terms of this idea of, should you fight it tooth and nail? Because like you mentioned, we hear that too, especially if this employee was a really bad employee, they were genuinely toxic, maybe they left the practice kind of, hanging, they just didn't give any notice, they just quit. And I can totally understand and appreciate just how frustrating that is. And then you get that letter from the unemployment, you're like, oh, it's the last straw kind of a deal. The thing that I would encourage folks to think about is, number one, the money doesn't come out of your bank account. In a sense, you've already spent the money. Even if your rates go up a little bit, we're talking about, $100 a year, maybe. We're not talking about thousands and thousands of dollars. The other thing to keep in mind is that sometimes unemployment serves as sort of a buffer between you and the employee and something more serious. There have been a number of cases where the employer fights the unemployment all the way to the bitter end and the hearing and all of that. And the employee goes, oh, you want to fight? Okay, let's fight. And then they go, all right, well, now I'm going to report you to OSHA, or now I'm going to report you to the State Labor Board for that time we went to a CE training and maybe there was overtime or whatever it is. And now this thing that you thought was a big deal is suddenly a really big deal. And you may also say, well, Becky who left, Becky's just a sweet lady. She would never do that. Well, maybe Becky's married to a husband who's a fighter, or maybe her brother is like, what? They fired you? Oh, heck no, I'm coming after them. So just know that unemployment sometimes is this nice buffer. And when the employee goes away and they get unemployment, in their mind, they think, yeah, I won. I really stuck it to Dr. So-and-so and I got the unemployment. And in your mind, when you take the high road, you go, I don't even remember that person. I've already moved on. We're so glad that this terrible employee is gone. And now we can focus on what we really want to build here at this practice. And I don't even remember that person's name. I don't even care. So that's what we recommend, is just kind of take the high road with unemployment. It's not a big deal, and just move on.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned my next question, you mentioned in your comment, another, I think, common misconception, or a common question I see asked in all these Facebook groups is, we're going to a CE event. Do I have to pay the team? So, it's mind-boggling how many people ask that. And, there are obviously people there who are not HR experts and they're answering it 100% incorrectly. So can you set the record straight? And when you go to a CE event, what needs to be covered by the office, et cetera, et cetera?
Sure. Yeah. And we could easily talk for an hour about CE and all the different types and the circumstances and all of that. I'll give everyone a number to write down or to look up when they have a chance. And this is a federal labor code. So the CE rules fall under federal rules. There are a couple states, California and Washington, that have their own state protections that kind of are on top of the federal ones. But for most folks in the country, it's under Federal Labor Code 785.27. So if folks want to look that up, Labor Code 785.27. The thing to know about CE, a lot of folks have this misconception that as the dentist, I can decide what I pay for, as far as, will I pay for the hotel, the travel, the meals, the cost of the tuition, wages, travel time. Everyone just kind of assumes I get to decide all of that myself. The reality is the federal government has 3 buckets that they put everything in. One bucket is wages while the employee is in the course. A second bucket is a hourly travel time rate for traveling to and from the event. And the third bucket is basically everything else. It's all the expenses, the hotel, the gas, the airfare, the cost of the course, et cetera. And the government has 4 criteria that they use to determine whether you're, in a sense, in the game, whether you need to pay any of this stuff or not. And it's not one of these things where if you meet 2 of them, but you don't meet the other 2, then you don't have to pay for stuff. It's that once you trip just one of these 4 criteria, you're in the game, even if the other 3 you haven't tripped. And in that labor code number I gave you, there's a list of those 4 criteria. But I'll just say real quick that one of them is the one that everyone thinks of, and that's whether the course is required or optional. So yes, if you as the dentist require and say everyone must go to this course, you have tripped one of those criteria and now you're in the game. But there are 3 other criteria. One of them doesn't come into play very much, and that's whether there's productive work happening at the event. So one of these where you're taking patients with you to the event and working on patients, and those patients are paying you. That one doesn't come up for most events, but the other 2 do. And one of them is about whether the course is during regular working hours. So let's say it's a Monday through Thursday practice. They close on Wednesday, Thursday, and everyone travels and they go to an event Thursday, Friday. Because the event is taking place partially during regular working hours, that trips one of the criteria. Now you're in the game. Even if you say, hey, this is totally optional, you don't have to go if you don't want to. The fact that it's during working hours, you trip that criteria, you're in the game. And then there's another one that has to do with whether the course is related to the job. There's some caveats with that around whether it's a licensed position and there's CE. But the thing to just know is it's really, really easy to trip one of these criteria. And then you're in the game for potentially wages, travel time, and so on. And if folks have questions about it or they want to learn more, don't hesitate to reach out to me or reach out to someone, in the HR field, because it's a really complicated set of rules and regulations, but it's so common in the dental world, and it's so important that everyone knows about this, because it can be a really costly expense if it's not handled properly.
I think the ultimate message that you want to make sure everybody understands is that if you're not sure, to reach out to an HR professional. There are plenty in the industry, but if you're not sure, you have any questions, you should definitely be connected with somebody who can give you advice and not use ChatGPT for that, like you said. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about was, what are some other scenarios that you think a practice should be reaching out to you? Obviously, if there's anything related to wages or benefits, or in this case, CE requirements, but there's some other things. How about buying another office? I mean, how do you deal with that and talking to, recommended talking to the doctors who are buying in the practice?
Yeah, so this is a really great area where there's differences between tax rules and HR rules. So when you have a second location, the most common approach is your CPA sets up a separate tax ID. You may have separate payroll accounts. And so in your mind, because there's separate tax ID numbers, in your mind you think, well, these are totally different and separate locations. The reality is, from an HR law standpoint, the government looks at other criteria. They don't care about how many tax ID numbers you have. They don't care whether it's this type of corporation or that. What they look at is who is making the HR decisions and how much overlap there is with the HR side of the practices. So, for example, do you share employees, and some employees work at one location or the other? Do you share HR resources? And one of the most important criteria is all about who is sort of in control from an HR standpoint. So, of course, the typical model when you have multiple locations is you have some sort of owner, doctor, or doctors, and then you typically have some sort of a manager who's kind of like a regional manager who's overseeing all of the locations. Typically, that leadership team is making all of the big decisions about who gets hired, who gets fired, who gets a raise, who gets a promotion. In a sense, that core team is controlling all of the employees at all of the locations. When that happens, typically the government sees this as, in a sense, a joint employer situation, and they look at these multiple businesses as if they are one business. And where that becomes really critical is with overtime. If we have, say, someone who's working 22 hours at this location and 23 hours at that location, individually, they're below the overtime threshold of 40 hours. But if you add it together, they're over 40, and now they actually are owed overtime. Another scenario would be with state rules or even federal rules that change based on how many employees you have. Maybe at this location, we only have 8 employees, and at this location, we have 9. The Americans with Disabilities Act at the federal level kicks in when you have 15 or more employees. So individually, these both locations at 8 or 9, they're below 15. You add them together, now we're at 17, and now we're above that threshold. And the government would say, now the ADA protections apply to all of these employees. So just the takeaway there is just know that if you have multiple locations or if you want to expand into multiple locations, know that it's not just about tax ID numbers and therefore they're separate and everything is fine. You need to look at the whole structure and especially who's making the HR decisions. And one last thing with that is, if you are buying multiple locations across state lines, now you've added the complexity of individual state rules in those different scenarios. So one practice, common example is sometimes there's one location that's in a state that has mandatory sick leave, the other location does not have mandatory sick leave. And now we have to navigate that as far as benefits, the manual, who's getting what, and the whole thing gets a lot more complicated.
As you said, we can have conversations on specific topics for an hour each topic. I mean, it's crazy how deep and wide this goes. I know we're coming to the end of the content, but is there anything that we didn't touch base on that you feel is important to let the listeners know about or viewers know about? Obviously, we'll get your contact information after the lightning round Q&A, but is there anything that we didn't discuss that you want to bring up?
Well, I'll just mention one quick thing on a positive note. If folks haven't heard of a book called The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace, I would highly recommend checking that out. It's a very short, very simple book. If you're familiar with the concept, the 5 love languages, this is kind of that same concept applied to the workplace. And appreciation is one of these things that is in short supply in the workforce overall. And it is so powerful at creating your culture and a culture of positivity and just expressing how grateful you are that these folks are here and helping you build your dream practice. So that book is great. It's very short, very intuitive, and highly recommend that for folks to check out if they want something as kind of a model and some structure for building some positivity in their practices. We don't have any financial, piece with that book. It's a really great concept and it's really powerful. So just wanted to put out something that's a little bit more positive. I know we've talked about some of the, rules and laws and worst case scenarios, but the appreciation piece is a really nice thing to build in.
That's great. And we'll put that in the show notes as well. So let's transition out of the content and we'll switch to the lightning round Q&A. For those that haven't listened to an episode, these are lightning round questions. They're business related questions. And I'm going to ask Alan to answer these fairly quickly. Okay. So the first question is, if you achieved all of your life goals tomorrow, what would you do next?
I would start some sort of kind of like a life skills school. I would, something that teaches young people basics of money management, basics of relationship management, boundaries, just navigating the world, life skills, things that you don't learn in school.
Okay. Well, what were some of the biggest lessons that has impacted the way you work? What was the lesson and what was it like before and after?
Oh, I would just say, all the times that I've, accidentally stepped in something and didn't realize what I was doing and kind of bumbled into something, or just recognizing blind spots and kind of shining a light in that, and then kind of making a commitment to keep that in mind and go, okay, I'm going to remember that for next time. But, failure is what allows us to grow.
Great answer there. What mindset has helped make you successful?
I would just say, as much as possible, keeping in mind a growth mindset and just not dwelling on the past and moving forward and saying, okay, we're going to get through this. Nothing that has happened, even when it's really bad, it's not permanent. And just, yeah, continuing to move on and not get stuck in a fixed mindset.
Great. What business-related book has inspired you the most, or what is your favorite book? Another way of asking that question.
One of my favorites is The Untethered Soul. It's not a business book per se, it's more of a personal growth book, but that about 10 years ago had a really big impact on my life and just the overall level of happiness, how I approach day-to-day interactions with people, and it definitely has helped in the workplace as well. So yeah, Untethered Soul, really, really great book. Love that one.
That's a great answer. Describe Mondays for you in one word.
Oh, Mondays for me, I try to do project work in the mornings. Mondays, I'm coming in refreshed from the weekend. So I spend a lot of time Monday mornings when I'm at my absolute sharpest. And that's when I try to do more of the entrepreneurial work, the projects, the visioning, just the stuff that takes a lot of brain power.
Got it. Has anyone in your network been important to your journey?
Oh, sure. My father has been a big part of that. He was one of my main mentors with this company. And then certainly just folks that I've met in the speaking consulting network have been tremendous. Just wonderful people doing amazing work.
Got it. Two last questions. First one is, how do you define success?
In my case, I would say it's monetary, but it's also impact. And it's really about, in a sense, are you fundamentally making things better? And in our case, I know that we're making people's lives better and helping. And that's really success for me. It's not just money. It's about the impact.
Great answer. And the last question is, and I ask this of everybody, what is one subscription, so something you pay for monthly or annually, okay? Business or personal, doesn't matter, okay? Could be either or, that you cannot live without. So one subscription that you cannot live without.
Oh, gosh. Well, I want to say QuickBooks because that's kind of important. I honestly, this is not going to be all that exciting, but the Wall Street Journal. I subscribe to the Wall Street Journal. I read it every day. And in terms of trends and the market and just quality journalism, I love the Wall Street Journal. So yeah, I don't know that I would be able to succeed without that one.
Got it. So this was great. You did really well answering those questions. How can people find out more about how you and Bent Erickson can help their practice?
Yeah, I would say check out our website, just benterickson.com. We've got a lot of good info on there about who we are and what we do. And there's a lot of good free resources on there as well about HR and just, some educational content. So I would just encourage folks to go there if you want to chat with me or reach out to us. We've got a contact page on there. So yeah, just check us out.
And there was an offer you wanted to throw out to the listening and viewing audience?
Oh, yeah. So, I know that HR obviously is not everyone's favorite topic. Nobody goes to dental school to do this stuff. And so we have an offer for the listeners of this podcast. So if you want to take action on this and say, okay, really get your ducks in a row from an HR standpoint, if you sign up between now and the end of the year, you can save $500 off of we call it the HR Director Package. And we call that, in a sense, a taking action bonus. And again, I know HR is easy to procrastinate. I'll get to that later, put it off. And so this is really kind of us trying to reward you for taking action and really getting your ducks in a row and getting your practice in compliance and having all the resources to really run your practice effectively. So just an offer for folks who want to take advantage of that between now and the end of the year and potentially save a little bit on their taxes too.
Well, that was great. Alan, you were a wonderful guest. Thank you for finding some time to meet with me finally. I'm glad we got this recorded. If you're listening and viewing it and you have questions, please reach out. If you think a friend would benefit, you heard something they have experienced, obviously let them know about this podcast episode, like us, review us, share this episode. That's anything you can do would be helpful to the podcast. Remember to check out the sponsors, Dental Intelligence, CallRail, and Net32. My event, Supercharge Your Dental Practice, is in September 2026 at Pier 66. You can go to superchargeyourdentalpractice.com to find out more. And as I end every single one of my episodes, remember, Your reputation matters. Until the next one, Alan, thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll talk to everyone soon.
Thank you.